Okay, ladies and gentlemen, can you hear us? Okay, lovely. We're going to sit in the middle where you can see us. So it's that time in the afternoon when we loosen our corsets and get down to talking about business, right?
Correct.
And today what we're going to talk about in the next 20, 25 minutes is about edge. And if you'll allow me just briefly, as a woman of a certain age, I remind myself that I see the same patterns again and again in our industry. And it occurs to me that the edge tries to answer the same problem that we were trying to answer about 25 years ago when someone called Francis Cairncross from The Economist wrote a book called The Death of Distance. Does anyone remember that book? Or are you all too young? Well, some of you are quite young. It was basically a book that said, you know, the internet has been built in a particular way, in a very North American way, which means that most of us have to schlep traffic back and forth across continents, and we really ought to build infrastructure to do this better. Now, in a way, we might argue that the edge answers a similar problem in a radically different way. Now, my partner in crime today knows all about the edge. And I will say that edge is in the eye of the beholder, and we're going to talk about what that means. So please, let's introduce, Dennis, if you would introduce yourself. He is a distinguished engineer, and you're going to tell us what that means, right?
So, a distinguished engineer means I'm a technical executive at IBM. I'm leading a cohort of people in the hybrid cloud division. And my special focus for this year is edge and also the virtualization of the networking within the telco space, because I think both of them are going hand in hand to have the optimal usage for the edge.
So what we're going to try to cover off here is, yes, we're going to try to do a bit of definition, right? But actually what we'd like to do is engage with you about where the money might be. And just a quick word about the money angle. If you're a telco, the reality is that managed network services are growing at around 3% per annum. Within that, there are a few little glories, such as SD-WAN services growing at 20% compound annual growth rate. A few other little things like managed wireless LAN services, about 10%. But if you're in the cloud game, it's about 25% per annum, right? And your argument is that edge is part of cloud, right?
Yes. From our point of view, edge is a very specific implementation of a hybrid cloud, and it is going to allow us to handle how we are going to run applications or services in a very distinct way. When we look at edge, it's actually responding to a number of issues. Today, when you see that we are instrumenting places, we are bringing all the data back to the cloud or to a central place, we do some analytics and we react on it. Now, what if I need to react within half a second or within...
Or less?
In 2 milliseconds because I have an autonomous car? I cannot be connected all the time. So this is where the paradigm of edge is really going to change the way we are going to place and handle our applications and data.
Dennis, when I hear the word paradigm, I smell bullshit.
Oh.
So can you lay it out a bit more? And I think we have a useful slide, right,
yes,
which hopefully the audience can see.
So I created an infographic on actually to explain where we are on all the pieces in an edge environment. So a lot of things are happening already with the IoT, but to be honest, IoT is practically a dumb end reporting to a very smart backend, and that's how we are going to react. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to bring out actually the computation to the place where the data is created and where the action needs to be taken. So that can be or in the edge network of the telco, that can be on the perimeter of a plant, like a server-based environment where I'm going to do localized data handling, or it can be actually on the device where I really need to have an AI model that actually is going to inspect specific things.
Right. And so another way of thinking about this is we're moving the intelligence further and further away from central to where the actual businesses are. And we're doing this in a number of different ways with data centers getting suitcase-sized and smaller. In fact, I think I read in the press recently we were going to have these little edge data centers in sort of parking meters. They were going to double up as edge computing sites. You'd heard this one as well.
Yeah.
Any other funny ones you can think of?
So there are a few things. So there are places where we are saying we are going to have a data center in a box, and that box can go from a big rack to actually, as you say, a suitcase, which is practically very mobile. Why are we actually trying to get all of those capabilities so dense is because I need to be able to actually do my data handling and my decision making even if I'm not able to connect. And this is a real changer where we see a difference between IoT. I need, for instance, first-time responders. When they go into the field, normally they have a very good coverage on 5G, 4G. But if you look at the fire that we had in Australia, that was also impacting the connectivity. What if I have a truck where also all my material and my data is actually handled so that I can coordinate much better on my first-time responders? This is where the edge is going to make completely a big difference compared to an IoT strategy.
So those are really nice examples, but there are some others out there, right, that are not just mobile, they're from a stationary position, correct?
Correct. So the mobile part is one item. The most implementations that we will see is actually going to be in production plants, in hospitals, in governmental buildings, etc., where we are going to have the capability of handling our data. For instance, what we see as a big category of services for edge is visual inspection. And visual inspection...
Of what?
Of anything. For instance, I'm working on a project where we are going to look at how welding is done in a production line. And having an offset of 0.1 millimeter can make a difference between this car or this piece of equipment is suited to go outside or it is a poor quality car. So we need to be able to make sure that I can inspect immediately and already do a refinement of the robot so that he can do a precise welding the second time within the same passing.
Now, to me, that sounds like supercharging a local area network. So where's the edge bit?
So the edge bit is that when you are actually going to look at the inspections of through HD camera, I really want to do that at the robot. I don't want to do that in the back end where I'm still going to lose 100 to 200 milliseconds per round trip and where I really need to react. I really need to react immediately when there is an offset. The other problem is that if I'm not going to offset it, then I'm going to have poor quality and I have to remove the cars.
Okay, and so that's a really good example. Let's talk about who might be involved in that, because I've been looking at this and it tells me, my list gets longer and longer in terms of who might be involved in which aspect of this. Edge plus cloud, edge plus security, because by the way, if all of these suitcase-sized data centers proliferate, you can walk off with them pretty easily, couldn't you?
Yes, so first of all, we are going to have thousands, maybe 10,000s of implementations of those mini data centers. So that's already one thing that we need to figure out. How can we secure that? How can we make sure that the data is also collected properly? Mm-hmm. And the other part is also, once you go up to the device, it becomes 100,000 to 1 million. Mm-hmm. And then you need to also have a better way of, let's call it, managing all of those items, because I need to push applications, AI models, I need to do refreshment, because when I do retraining of those models, they need to be refreshed. So I need to be more autonomous in how I'm going to deploy my services.
Now, all of what you say makes really good sense, except it strikes me that what's happening in the market is not quite joined up. If I do a little search on Edge right now, what I see are examples of announcements such as Vodafone, Verizon, SK Telecom, the list gets longer, ties up with Amazon Web Services to provide edge services. And I do wonder here where the money's going to go. And speaking to a service provider the other day, they informed me that there is a race on, effectively, for these alliances between the Azures, the Amazons, and others. They had put in 40 million, in their case, to capture a certain region of the world. And frighteningly to me, they said, well, we expect that our margins in this particular expensive region are going to drop from about 60% to about 15%. But we think that's okay because the volumes are going to be so high. Is someone in Cloud Cuckoo Land? What do you think?
So this is actually the question that many of the operators are going to be asking. Am I going for what I call the easy money, being the cheap pipe for Amazon, for other over-the-top players? It's going to be there anyway because they will penetrate the market. But on one hand, then you will be pushed back into a normalized telco operator. You are not actually moving up the chain, getting into the value where actually the clients are going to pay much more money. One other danger is, if I'm an edge provider, I do co-location in your data centers, and I'm going to do some retail solution so that I can have much easier handling of, for instance, queuing in a retail shop. Who is going to prevent me then to actually have voice over IP or other more telco services just adjacent to that service platform? They can't stop that because they have a co-location contract.
Now, Dennis, be careful. There may be pitchforks coming out soon if you keep talking in this way. Let's ask some of the audience. I'm aware, I don't know if he wants to put his hand up or not, we have a gentleman from Verizon who is doing a lot of the 5G strategy. Gary, where are you? Gary, you want to give us a bit of a comment on this? I think it would be most useful. Just between us girls. Just wait for the mic.
This is my value add here. Yeah, nothing like being put on the spot, but I think the point has been made that, you know, there are going to be very many different implementations in different places, so it's not just one size fits all. So Amazon Web Services, for example, it will just be one of many options, and it will fit certain situations.
Okay. Not as ambitious an answer as I thought you'd have, but that's okay. Let me say that there are some service providers who think of edge in a different way. They're thinking of that bundling angle again, and very intelligently so, thinking about edge plus private mobile networks, right? And I think you show that picture here. So should we talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So what I see, or when I encounter most of my telco operators in my sessions, we always try to figure out what is the telco angle on that edge play. Because if I can find a combination of, for instance, a visual inspection solution for a client, but I can add very specific telco capabilities, that makes it a double winner. So one of those things was a brainstorming around oil rigs. How can I actually now bring edge computing to oil rigs? They have very, very miserable connectivity, so they need to do a lot of things on site, but they also need a lot of connectivity for their specific devices. And this is where all of a sudden the idea came, what if I combine my private LTE with my edge solution so that I have one single connectivity area for the whole solution. And this will allow me to modernize even my sensors more frequently on the oil rig.
And just thinking that some of these oil and gas companies send helicopters having mapped the ocean floor to actually compute all of that and see where the oil is. So you can see the logic for edge there. But it's also in more mundane environments. It's also for ordinary businesses, correct?
Correct. So we've seen already, especially in Germany, where a lot of companies are now applying for a 5G license. They actually say, okay, we want to own our own license and make sure that our connectivity has been done correctly in a private manner because I want to connect all my devices.
don't we have to be a little bit careful here? Because when Omdia did ask this question of enterprises only a few months ago around who do you trust, around 5G and building a 5G network, fewer than 1 in 10 said they were going to build that network and manage it themselves. So let's be quite clear about where the expertise is and who's going to deliver it.
Correct.
Maybe the manufacturing companies, the great Mittelstand of Germany, has a different view for certain reasons, but that's not all of the enterprise universe, right?
But even those are going to ask actually the telco operators to come in and step in to do their licensing, to actually set up the networking and manage that on-premise for them.
Just the telcos? I think some of the research that we've been doing suggests it's a broader church than that. Now, does the audience have any comments on what we've said so far? We'd love to hear your voices. Don't be afraid. Yes, Ray's got a question at the back. I know your voice is loud, but maybe not that loud. Give the man a mic. If you don't know him, this is Ray Lemestre from Light Reading.
There you go. It saves me introducing myself. Thanks, Camille. Wonder if either of you or anybody in the audience thinks that is a single broad global edge infrastructure the right way to go, or do we need very specific vertical focused different edge infrastructures to meet the particular needs of certain types of companies?
So, in my opinion, and this is my personal opinion, not that one of IBM, I think we will have more vertical aligned solutions and even private edge solutions for specific companies that really do not want to share anything. And this is going to be contributing to a progress that my CTO is saying that if we look at edge and the billions of devices and servers that maybe we are going to connect, this is actually going to implode on the edge community. We need to make sure we open source specific things so that we are keeping standards, that we are going to use the same kind of management tooling, the management aspects of that, so that manufacturers can hook easily their devices and their mobile management systems.
Yeah, I used to negotiate contracts for a while for a living, and I did it for a number of different people. And I can tell you, if I were the CTO of a financial services company or a global healthcare company, there is no way in hell that I would just, let someone manage my edge without knowing exactly where every single one of those data centers is, and that there would be a contract associated with that. Because, by the way, it's not about liquidated damages that you might be able to extract in that contract for edge services, but actually the terrible effect, the regulatory risk that you're exposed to as that organization. So I think we need to be very careful about what's going to be appropriate for different industries out there. And sure, there's a wholesale opportunity, profound wholesale opportunity. But let's be clear about how that translates to different organizations with different regulatory and different types of security constraints upon them.
So one thing is that I see coming is that the provisioning of edge platforms for, I call it more the mid-section of companies, not the big and large companies, they will do their own thing and they will have very special requirements. Now the mid-section still has the complexity and needs to do the same thing as the bigger ones, but they don't have the masses, the budgets, and the people to actually execute on that. So edge as a service is then going to be the solution for them to actually go into that space too.
And that's, I completely agree with you there. And this, again, that mid-sized organization, let's remind ourselves who they are. That they represent typically 2% demographically of the enterprise universe in countries like Germany, but also the UK, France. but they deliver typically about 20% of the GDP. So these are not organizations to be ignored, and they are quality tyrants, many of them. Some of them really need assistance, and that's where I think the nexus of competition will be. Maybe not telcos, maybe SIs, maybe systems houses, maybe someone completely new, and God knows there are enough of them out there. And by the way, the direction of travel is not necessarily from a centralized data center, but maybe competitors from within the building going outwards.
So when you look at the whole ecosystem that is actually going to be around edge, you will see that new players will come in, and my personal opinion is that for telco players or service providers, you should look at types of solutions. You need to have an ecosystem of ISVs and all of that, for sure, but a lot of stuff is really around visual inspection, visual analytics, etc. So being very good at that segment of technology could give you a big advantage to your competitors.
How are we doing on time? We've got... Okay, I just, if you'll allow me, I'd like to just throw this out there, because this is something that's just been eating me out, something that I've been thinking about. So we just recently did some work on enterprises, what some of their concerns were in terms of network services, and a lot of interviews with service providers. And it seems to me the service providers have been trying to pick and choose what they want to do when there's some very obvious things they could be doing which link to edge, which link to private networks and monetization. Would it surprise you to know that 9 out of 10 enterprises want someone to manage their local area network, number one, that they're investing more in that type of infrastructure because of all of the IoT type of attached stuff on that. Oh, and by the way, their number one concern or desire, which they're not getting satisfied by anyone, is someone to manage their LAN and their WAN together. Doesn't that link to an edge proposition as well? It's a shame, isn't it, that telcos think that the LAN is foreign territory, somewhere they've never made money. Other people might think differently.
So this is a good opportunity to actually discuss how I think that we need to go into the premises of the enterprises. It's not just at the border of the radio access network. You really need to go in there. They are demanding or even asking, even begging, that we are going to manage specific areas of their networking, but also how we are going to drive services and solutions towards them. It's pretty complex. Operators are very well in handling that complexity because they need to do that already for their own network. So it's a normal, I call it, expansion for their network capabilities.
Yeah, normal, but they don't like going within the perimeter of the building. That's a border they don't tend to like. And yet, as Omdia's fine and large building management team would tell you, there's a lot happening in the building infrastructure game, and some of these guys are looking for annuity revenue and expansion. So there will be a clash, and it's coming soon.
And this is where the ecosystems can actually flourish. So we can actually try to figure out who is out there. First of all, what are our new technology players where I can team up to do the fantastic visual stuff. But who is actually also out there to do these local management activities of buildings, but also of enterprise networks?
And let me ask you, I'm sure that Dennis, looking at you, you're probably not a betting man, or is this a secret? Okay, right. But I will ask you anyway this question. Considering that, edge is being aligned with cloud, as you've argued, it's part of cloud, it's hybrid cloud, that it's being aligned with security, it's being aligned with marketplace, because think of all the different players that might provide services on that edge. It's aligned with orchestration, it's aligned with IoT, it's aligned with different types of networks, not least 5G. It's aligned with storage, data centers, power and wholesale. What's your bet where the number one, who's going to make the money fastest out of edge?
That's a good question. So there is I think the solution providers who are actually helping.
Sorry, what what's the solution provider?
So the ISVs, the people who are actually going to build the edge applications, they are going to be hit first to actually get a lot of revenue and a lot of projects. But as a secondary drag-on, you will see that people who are actually going to do the managed part of that edge environment, they are going to be the big hitters. So the solutions are going to be put on top of there, and they are going to be rolled out, but then they will see the complexity. They will see there is a managed problem over there, and that's where managed service providers are going to be very powerful. You could think at hyperscalers, they can easily come in, although they don't like to go on-premise. Many of them, they rather have everything in their data centers. I think this is where we can have a bigger stake in the ground from a telco business to say, okay, I'm going to do that extra mile, or as you indicated before, that extra connectivity.
So, ladies and gentlemen, come back next year because we are here to help you place those bets. We're not allowed to invest in some of these companies, but you can. So, I just want to say thank you very much for my industry luminary and distinguished engineer. Please, a round of applause for Dennis.